What's up, guys? In this video, I'm going to be showing off some brand new PlayStation 2 homebrew software that I've been working on. If you follow the PS2 hacking and homebrew scene at all, there's a good chance you've heard of a project called Extreme Elite Boot Plus. This is a full XMB-style system menu for the PS2 that's been in development for over a decade at this point. The goal of this project is to create a single unified launcher/dashboard for the PS2 that can self-boot and perform all the most common homebrew tasks, much like custom dashboards that the original Xbox has had for years. Now, while XEB Plus is very ambitious and very cool, it is also very incomplete. At time of writing, the only publicly available release is a preview build from December 2021 that only features around 30% of the intended functionality. While it's nowhere near complete, XEB Plus currently has enough functionality to act as a very nice homebrew launcher, essentially serving the same purpose as the FreeMC boot menu. That's cool and all, but personally, I haven't really felt the need to use XEB Plus for anything just yet. While I do prefer the XMB-style interface to that of FreeMC boot, in its current state, it's just another means of launching OPL and uLaunchElf, and without a dedicated bootloader, you still need FreeMC boot or another similar exploit to chain load into XEB Plus. Using XEB Plus as it is right now would just create an unnecessary layer between me and the software I actually want to run on my PS2. The thing I've been waiting for is for XEB Plus to be able to replace OPL. If it were possible to launch game backups straight from this dashboard, it would massively streamline the PS2 homebrew experience by keeping pretty much everything you need confined to a single app with a unified interface. I've been waiting almost 3 years for that functionality to be added in some form, and it's unclear when or even if that's going to happen. The closest thing we've gotten up until recently was a proof-of-concept USB loader plugin, and that was only released last year. This plugin works, but it really is just a proof-of-concept. The menu is the same as the rest of the interface, which is really not designed for browsing lists of more than a dozen items or so, and you can only load games off a USB drive. For those who don't know, every model of the PS2 uses USB 1.1, which was never intended for mass storage applications. The maximum data throughput of the PS2's USB ports is a little less than half of the DVD-ROM drive's slowest speed. So, while you can load PS2 games over USB, it's very much not recommended. Load times are abysmal, and anything that has to be streamed in, like music or FMV sequences, tends to stutter or cut out. Even if the rest of the user experience were perfect, this plugin would not be fit for purpose due to the USB limitation alone. Now, this proof-of-concept loader plugin is actually just a front end for a program called Neutrino, which is a lightweight PS2 backup loader with extremely high compatibility. It can load games from just about anything that can shove data into a PS2. This includes USB ports, memory card slots, network shares, and the PlayStation 2 hard drive add-on. The reason this proof of concept is confined to USB loading is because XEB Plus loads from USB and has no way to directly access data on any other interface. Luckily, the plugin system used here is extremely flexible. Anyone with a knowledge of Lua scripting can use it to do pretty much whatever they want within the XEB interface. After taking a look at the code for the proof-of-concept Neutrino loader, I took it upon myself to try to turn it into an actually useful PlayStation 2 backup loader. I've now spent the past several weeks working on this, and in that time, I've gotten the plugin to load games from the PS2 hard drive, added several quality-of-life features, and polished up the menu into something that you might actually want to use on a regular basis. The version of this plugin I've built adds things like navigation shortcuts, custom game artwork, remembering the last played game, and a favorites list. That last one is a feature not currently present in OPL that both I and my boyfriend specifically wanted in a PS2 backup loader. Speaking of which, I'd actually consider what I've made here to be fairly comparable to OPL, minus a small handful of features that I do hope to eventually add. Even in its current state, though, this plugin turns XEB Plus into the absolute best PlayStation 2 backup loader out there, at least as far as my use case is concerned. As of uploading this video, I've released it publicly so anyone with a PS2 can try it for themselves. A link to that is down in the description. The rest of this video is going to be a full setup guide for the XEB Plus hard drive loader, with a bit of a feature showcase and a few tidbits about the development process mixed in. The setup required here can be a bit involved, so if you're at all interested in trying this plugin out, you might want to stick around. With that, let's get started. To get hard drive loading up and running in XEB Plus, you're going to need a few things. First off, you'll need a PS2, obviously. Specifically, you're going to need a FAT model because this plugin makes use of the network adapter and hard drive add-on, which you're also going to need. Ideally, you'll want a network adapter that's been fitted with a SATA conversion kit, because out of the box, it uses IDE. And I'm pretty sure no one's made new IDE drives for over a decade at this point. By the way, if you are stuck with only a PS2 Slim at your disposal, don't worry. It should be pretty straightforward to create a version of this plugin that uses an MX4 ISO in place of the hard drive. The reason I haven't done that yet is because, 1, I don't currently have an MX4 ISO to test with, and 2, there's a few more features I want to add still, and I want to get those done before I start splitting off different versions. Just know that a version of this plugin that works with the PS2 Slim will probably exist sooner or later, and you should subscribe if you want to be notified when I release that. You'll also need a way to run unsigned code on your PS2, which in this case probably means a memory card with either FreeMC boot or PS2 BBL installed. If you're watching this video, you probably already have one of these, so I'm not going to go into any more detail on that. One thing to note here, though, is that this hard drive loader is not compatible with FreeHD boot. You'll also need access to a computer running either Windows or Linux, and while it's not strictly required, I would recommend also having some sort of USB hard drive dock or adapter on hand. Finally, you'll need a FAT32 formatted USB drive for the XEB Plus install. Now, getting this might actually be a little trickier than you might think, because in my testing, I couldn't get my PS2 to recognize any drive larger than 4 GB, so I hope you have some old USB sticks lying around. Now, let's get on with the setup. The first thing you'll want to do is download the Extreme Elite Boot Plus Christmas Preview build if you don't already have it. A link to that will be in the description. Put in the archive password and extract the XEB Plus folder to the root of your FAT32 USB drive. Next, go and grab the Neutrino Launcher HDD package from the link in the description. Open it up, and once again extract the XEB Plus folder into the root of the USB drive. If you get any pop-ups asking if you want to merge folders, just say yes to everything. Once that's all done, it's a good idea to stick the drive in the PS2 and make sure you can boot into XEB Plus. The easiest way to do that is to just go into ulaunch-elf and run xeb_xmas.elf from the USB drive. If the loader plugin installed correctly, you should see Neutrino Launcher HDD listed on the dashboard. If everything works, you may want to configure your PS2 exploit of choice to auto-start XEB+, at least if you plan to use it as your main system dashboard once this is all done. Once you know XEB+ is working and you have a boot configuration you're happy with, pull the flash drive and head back over to the computer. The next thing you'll probably want to do is get the hard drive set up for game loading, and that actually brings me to another area where this plugin has an edge over OPL. The main release of OPL can only load games in HDL format from a drive that's specifically configured for it. All of that requires special software and limits the capacity of drives that can be used to 2 TB or less. Neutrino, on the other hand, can load games directly from an exFAT file system, which is the same format as the SD card on your phone. That not only makes it way easier to manage files, but it also adds support for bigger hard drives. I've tested it with a 4 TB drive, which works great, and in theory it should work with drives as large as 16 TB or more. What's interesting is there is actually a version of OPL that uses Neutrino as a back-end, but for some reason that version doesn't support exFAT hard drives. What's even more interesting is there's another version of OPL that does support exFAT, but does not use Neutrino. I actually tried switching to that version last year, but I found it to be horrifically laggy to the point of being pretty much unusable. Swapping things over to an SSD somehow made it even worse. That version of OPL hasn't received any updates in over a year at this point, which puts the plugin I've created in a unique position where, as far as I know, it's the only PS2 backup loader that uses Neutrino, supports high-capacity hard drives, and has an easy-to-navigate interface that actually works. So, to get the hard drive prepped for loading games, all you need to do is connect it to your computer, back up anything you care about that might be on it, then reformat it as an exFAT partition. And you're good to go. The first thing you'll want to do is create 2 folders on the root of your newly formatted hard drive, one called CD and the other DVD, both in all caps. Next, you'll want to take your legally acquired PS2 game rips and copy them into one of these 2 folders. If the game in question originally came on a blue-tinted disc and is less than 700 megabytes in size, then it needs to go in the CD folder. Everything else can be copied to DVD. Something to note here is that all your disk images must be in ISO format. If you have something else, like a bin.q file, you'll need to first convert it to ISO with a tool like OPL Manager. Also, be sure to check the file names of your games while you're moving them over to the drive. If you want to have game-specific artwork displayed in the loader menu, then the file name of each disk image needs to contain that game's title ID, which is a unique string of 4 letters and 5 numbers that usually looks something like this. The title ID is what the plugin uses to match games with their artwork files, and it needs to be present in the file name because the plugin has no other way of retrieving that information. The title ID parser I've written is fairly robust, so all of these title ID formats, and probably a few others, can be detected by it no problem. Though if the title ID is missing or severely malformed, then artwork for your game won't load, even if the files are present. You'll want to get a hold of an artwork pack that's made specifically for OPL, as I've designed the plugin to use the same image format and naming conventions. I've linked a pretty decent OPL artwork collection down in the description, or you can use your own if you already have one on hand. Once you have your artwork files, you'll want to navigate over to XEB+, GME, Art on the USB drive. You'll want to extract or copy the artwork files into this folder, but we only need the background and disk artwork. That is, files that have either _BG or _ICO in their file name. You can just put all the artwork files here if you really want to, but most of them won't be used by the plugin, and having excess files in this folder will make one of the upcoming steps take longer. Once all the files have finished copying to both drives, you'll want to stop and double-check everything before moving on to the next step. Make sure all the games you want are on the hard drive with the title ID and the file name if you plan on using artwork, and that the artwork for those games is on the USB. The reason being that going back to add games or make changes after this point is going to involve extra work and potentially take a lot more time. Once you're sure that everything on both drives is to your liking, go ahead and reopen the Neutrino Launcher plugin package. This time, you're going to open the folder that corresponds with whatever OS you're using and pull out the script file called run-on-HDD. Drop this file onto the root of your hard drive next to the CD and DVD folders and run it. It should go pretty quick, and it'll spit out a new folder named USB. Inside the USB folder, you'll find a copy of the CD and DVD folders from the root directory, complete with the same file names and everything. The difference is that the ISO files in these copies are all 0 bytes in size. There's no actual data here, just a bunch of empty files with the same names. You're going to want to now take the CD and DVD folders full of these empty ISO files and move them over to the root of the USB drive next to the XEB Plus folder. The reason for doing all this is that, like I mentioned earlier, XEB Plus can't access the hard drive, so the loader plugin has no way of knowing what files are on it or if it's even connected. The way I got around this limitation was just to create empty duplicate files of all the games on the USB drive. These files are what the loader displays in the menu. Then, when a game is launched, the plugin hands off control to Neutrino and issues it a command that tells it to load a file with the same name from the same location on the hard drive. As a result, if these two sets of folders aren't kept exactly in sync, you'll end up in a situation where either the games won't show up on the menu, or your console will freeze on a black screen when it tries to load a file that isn't on the hard drive. That's why I recommend getting everything set up in one go. If you do want to go back and add or remove games later, I'd suggest completely removing the CD and DVD folders from the USB drive and recreating them from scratch with the run-on-HDD script when you're done making changes to the hard drive. Believe it or not, this hacky workaround was by far the easiest part of this whole thing to develop. It only took me about 40 minutes to figure out, and most of that time was split between reading documentation, reverse engineering the Neutrino proof of concept script, and watching unrelated YouTube videos. In the end, I only had to change a single line of code in the proof of concept, and it worked first try. It was literally a case of going, let's see if this works, and then it did. I'm honestly shocked that no one seems to have figured out this workaround before me. By the way, the code for creating these empty copies of the game files is drop-dead simple, so if anyone wants to create a graphical interface for it, or come up with a program that can keep the two drives in sync, go right ahead, because I'm probably not going to get around to it. With all that done, we can finally head back over to the PS2. Install the hard drive in the expansion bay, plug in the USB drive, and boot into XEB+. Select Neutrino Launcher HDD to start the Backup Loader plugin. It might take a second to load. If you've correctly set up all the files for game artwork, you'll be greeted by this screen. Welcome to Purgatory. What's going on here is the plugin is scanning each game's file name for a title ID. If it finds one, it then searches the artwork folder for matching background and disk art and copies those into a hidden cache directory. Now, I'm not gonna lie, this process takes an agonizingly long time to complete the first time it runs. I'm talking multiple hours of just sitting on this screen and waiting if you have a large number of games installed. The worst part is that most of that time isn't even spent copying files. That part is relatively quick. The majority of the time each game takes to process is spent parsing file names in the artwork directory. That's why earlier I said not to put too many files in that folder, because it makes this process take longer. By the way, I am genuinely sorry to anyone who ends up sitting around waiting for this caching routine. I am well aware of how much it sucks, and believe me when I say I've done everything I know how to make it go faster. There are multiple checks in the code that will either skip or bail out of the file parsing routine if at all possible, and it can process numerous items in a single frame if those checks are hit. At the end of the day, though, there's just no getting around the extremely limited throughput of the USB 1.1 interface. That's the main reason this process takes as long as it does. The reason we have to build this cache in the first place is because it's the only way I could get custom artwork to display on the menu without grinding the system to a halt. I mentioned how a majority of the time the caching routine takes is spent just reading file names. Well, imagine trying to do that in real time. The first time I got this plugin to successfully load custom artwork, it took more than 2 entire minutes to load in 8 of these 64x64 disk icons, with the PS2 just sitting there, locked up, completely unresponsive the entire time. Granted, about 2/3 of that time was due to the fact that I was inadvertently loading the icons into memory 3 times before displaying them, but even after fixing that, it still took around 45 seconds to load a single page of icons. I found that pretty much any attempt to search for files during runtime renders the menu basically unusable, and trying to load in a file that doesn't exist immediately crashes the system, so checking that files exist beforehand isn't optional. The solution, then, is to check for every file that the menu might need to load ahead of time and build up a cache containing those files along with a list of the ones that are missing. Once that's been done, the plugin can just blindly load files at runtime with the assurance that everything is actually present on the disk. This strategy takes load times that would have lasted up to a minute and cuts them down to just a few seconds. Of course, the menu can still crash if the cache data gets out of sync, which is why there are a number of conditions that will trigger a cache refresh on startup. These include changing the contents of the CD or DVD folders on the USB drive, changing certain settings, or messing with pretty much anything in the cache folder. These refreshes are generally a lot quicker than the initial cache build, but they can still take 15 to 20 minutes if you have a lot of games. The refresh triggers are a tad on the aggressive side, so sometimes it might run when it doesn't strictly need to, but I figure it's better to do that than risk the menu randomly freezing for no clear reason. Honestly, this whole caching system is held together by a tangled mess of heuristics, and I don't really trust it to keep working without being actively monitored to some degree. That being said, auto-refreshes shouldn't ever happen as long as you don't change any files on the USB drive after the cache is built. With the artwork cache in place, though, I can show off some features of this plugin that I actually like. Basic up-down navigation with the D-pad is identical to how it was in the proof of concept. However, I've bound various quick navigation functions to the L and R buttons that help out immensely with browsing long lists. The L1 and R1 buttons scroll the list up and down 10 items at a time, and will continuously quick scroll if held. The L2 and R2 buttons jump between letters of the alphabet, and finally the L3 and R3 buttons jump straight to the top or bottom of the list. The X button launches the currently selected game with Neutrino, at least as long as a file with the same name exists on the hard drive. Earlier, I mentioned that Neutrino has excellent compatibility with the PS2 library, but that's a point that I really want to emphasize here. It supposedly has higher compatibility than OPL, which is already really good, and based on my testing, that sure seems to be the case. Jet X2O is a perfect example of this. It's a lesser-known game that I have never been able to get working right under OPL. No matter what compatibility settings I choose, it always either fails to launch or crashes when starting a race. With Neutrino, it works flawlessly, no compatibility tweaks required. If you do happen to have a game that Neutrino doesn't work with right away though, this launcher most likely has you covered. Pressing square while on the games list opens a context menu where you can set all of Neutrino's compatibility flags on both a global and per game basis. I believe all these same options are available in OPL, but you shouldn't need to rely on them nearly as much here. There's a couple other things in this context menu as well. If the selected game has a valid title ID, you have the option to recache artwork for just that one game. This deletes the cached files and recopies them from the GME/art folder. That way, you can add or update artwork for individual titles without having to do a full cache rebuild. The last option in this menu adds or removes the selected game from the favorites list. You can access the favorites list by pressing triangle on the menu, and go back to the full list by doing the same. When a game is in the favorites list, it'll have the word favorite shown under it. Now, I have put quite a bit of effort into optimizing the performance of this menu, but unfortunately, it's just not possible to get rid of every last hitch and stutter, especially with USB 1.1 being involved. To help make up for that, though, I've programmed these messages to pop up at the bottom of the screen every time the plugin does something that might make it hang for a sec. I've tried to keep the text accurate to what's really going on behind the scenes, because I like my software to actually indicate to the user what it's doing. Microsoft and your cryptic please wait screen. If for some reason you want to disable these messages, there is an option for that. Actually, there's a few options to configure this plugin that I haven't gone over yet. If you go back to the main menu and tab over to the far right, you'll find a second plugin that contains settings for the first one. As mentioned, there are options to disable status messages, but there's also the option to disable artwork, which makes the menu a bit more responsive, and has the side effect of disabling automatic cache refreshing most of the time. You can also turn off the disk icon animation in the menu if you find it distracting. Finally, there's the option to manually queue a cache refresh to run the next time the loader plugin is launched. This needs to be done if an auto refresh gets interrupted for any reason. If the loader plugin starts randomly crashing for no apparent reason, running a manual refresh will usually fix it. I think that just about covers everything as far as this plugin goes. Like I said before, I hope to release a version of this that supports MX4 ISO, and I will most likely be releasing updates that contain bug fixes and new features over the next couple months, so subscribe if you want to see updates on that. Before I go, I'd like to give a big shout out to everyone in the XEB Plus Discord server, especially Nuno6573, who translated this plugin into Spanish and Portuguese and made these icons for it. I'd also like to thank Chelsea, who also helped with translation and created the original Neutrino loader proof of concept. Also, when I first posted my progress on this plugin on Discord, they gave me a developer role and full access to the XEB source code without me even asking. Very cool all around, and that source code came in handy for fixing a couple of bugs and bringing the menu more in line with the rest of the interface. Thank you. And of course, I need to thank everyone else who was involved in the development of both XEB Plus and Neutrino. What I've created here would simply not be possible without all you guys laying the groundwork with your respective projects. Links to everything are down in the description, and I'll see you guys later.